program. Professor Ritaprada Munshi from Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. He is a PhD from Princeton University under the guidance of Andrew Wiles. He is the chief editor of the Ramanujan Mathematical Society Journal and recipient of ICTP Ramanujan Prize in 2018. With great pleasure, I invite Professor Ritaprada to chair the session of Professor Balu. Over to Ritaprada.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Vijay Kumar, and a very good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are on the globe, to all of you. It's my pleasant duty to welcome you all and to introduce the first speaker of this international conference on number theory and discrete mathematics, an event to commemorate 100 years of Ramanujan's death. Professor Balasubramaniam doesn't need any introduction, and I'm not going to tell you the list of awards and accolades that he has won. In his long research career, spanning more than 45 years, he has made significant contributions in several topics in analytic and combinatorial number theory, which includes his celebrated work with Desaulniers and Dresse of the famous worrying problem of 4-degree-4, that every natural number can be written as sum of 19 fourth powers. Professor Balasubramaniam served as the director of math science for several years, and during his tenure, math science scaled new heights and became an important center for scientific research in the country. Professor Balasubramaniam remains an inspiration to our generation. So with that, today is going to speak on the product of 3 primes in arithmetic progression. So Balu, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for a nice introduction. And let me first thank the organizers, in particular Amba Vijay Kumar, for this opportunity. I do understand that the audience consisting of not only number theorists, but even non-number theorists, that sort of forces me to go a little slow, which might sometimes be boring for the number theorists who know already the various informations. Therefore, let me start. Our starting point is the theorem of Dirichlet. This theorem says that whenever you have 2 integers a and q with the GCD 1, then this arithmetic progression a modulo q contains infinitely many primes. Therefore, every arithmetic progression a modulo q, of course, when a and q are not co-prime, obviously you don't expect any primes. That can be at most 1. But if a and q are co-prime, then you expect infinity. So the first question that you may obviously ask is, what would be the least such prime? Therefore, given this residue class a modulo q, what is the least prime? And therefore, the first result in this direction is due to Linnik, who proved that the least prime is at most a power of q. And the C that he got was rather large, very large in fact. And then there has been a lot of improvements on this, what can be done. And now the best result that is essentially known is that you can expect probably q power 5.18. And Chawla made a conjecture that you would be able to go up to q power 1 plus epsilon. And there are actually results which would say that this is true for the q power 2 plus epsilon for almost all a and q. I mean, that is something called a Bompiri-Vinogradov theorem, to which probably I will not talk much. Now, since with a single prime, the problem seems to be very difficult. For the single prime, you really need only the analytic methods. One does not know any non-analytic method to do this particular problem. And analytic method means it is really the study of the so-called L functions, which is a function which is analogous to the Riemann zeta function. And you study the L functions and the properties of the L functions, particularly the rate of growth of L functions, and that is what gives you this result. But on the other hand, you would expect that if you don't have a single prime, but if you take a product of primes, then probably something more could be done. For example, there is a conjecture due to L dash Woodlisco and Sarkozy, which says that if you have again A modulo Q, then you can ask whether there are primes, small primes, in fact P1 and P2 both lesser or equal to Q, with the P1, P2 congruent to A modulo Q. This, of course, will be definitely much weaker than the earlier conjecture, because it says even a single prime can get in Q power 1 plus epsilon, and therefore product of two primes getting should be easier, but even then we don't know that. And in fact, for two, we don't even know how to attack it again, other than the analytic methods. Analytic method seems to be the only one where one has to think. But for three, probably something more can be done. And that was initiated by Olivier Ramare and Alan Walker, and therefore let me just say what's the thing. Given a number Q, we want to know whether there is a bound f of Q such that for any A with the GCD of A and Q is equal to 1, you can find out three primes P1, P2, P3 less than or equal to f of Q, where the product P1, P2, P3 is congruent to A modulo Q. You see, once you have three primes, then there is a possibility of using even non-analytic methods. And in particular, you can probably use some combinatorial methods, and that is precisely what they did. And in fact, they proved the result first with the f of Q is equal to Q power 16 over 3. And then with the Priorworth and Ourier-Serra, we proved 650 Q whole cube, and now we are trying to see whether we can even get a Q power 5 by 2. And that's the result which I would explain. And in the meantime, I can first of all talk about what Ramare did for this first result, f of Q is equal to Q power 16 over 3, to give the basic idea of how the proof runs. Okay, therefore now we need the additive combinatorics. Let G be a group under the multiplication, particularly what we have in mind is a group which is Z over Q is that star, which is all the residue classes modulo Q, which are co-prime to Q. And now if you have a subset B of this group G, then we define B dot B to be all those elements which could be written as a product of B1 and B2, with B1, B2 belonging to B. And now remember, this B dot B is just a set, which means that the multiplicity is not taken into account. If ADC, which can be written as B1 times B2, that is already in the set B cross. And similarly, one can actually define B cross B cross B to be those elements which are product of B1, B2, B3. And in this notation, this theorem that P1, P2, P3 lesser or equal to FQ with the P1, P2, P3 congruent to A modulo Q can be reformulated. Therefore, let me do this formulation. Therefore, this question P1, P2, P3 lesser or equal to FQ with the P1, P2, P3 congruent to A modulo Q. This question can be replaced by does there exist an FQ such that if you take the set of all primes P lesser or equal to FQ with the P congruent to A modulo Q, therefore this set A now is a subset of the group G. The G is the group Z over Q Z star, and this A is a subset of the group G, and then you are looking at those primes which are congruent to A modulo Q and which are all lesser or equal to F of Q. And the question which you are now asking is that when you take this product of A cross A cross A, whether this product is exactly Z over 2 Z star. In other words, we are not interested in really getting primes in all residue classes, but what we are interested in is that the primes should be distributed in enough residue classes, and therefore if you take those residue classes in which the primes are distributed and call them as A, then A is rather large in the sense that when you take A dot A dot A, you get the full group Z over 2Z star. Now this is where the combinatorics plays role. This is where the combinatorics plays role in the following sense, that there are theorems, which I will be explaining in a few minutes, which would say that if A is a subset of a group G, and if the cardinality of A is rather large, then the A dot A will be the full group. And that essentially means, in some sense, we have to prove that the cardinality of A is large. Therefore, we are not even interested in proving that every residue class contains primes. We are only now interested in proving that enough residue classes contain primes. And therefore, there are two aspects of this question now. The number one, to prove that there are enough residue classes which contain a prime, and number two, if there are enough residue classes which contain the prime, which means that if A is sufficiently large, then A dot A is a full group. And okay, now before that, let me just go to this combinatorial idea, and then I will come back to this. What is the combinatorial idea? Suppose G is a finite abelian group, and you have two sets B and C, such as the cardinality of B plus the cardinality of C is bigger than the cardinality of G, then the product of the group BC is exactly equal to G. Therefore, if you have a group where you have two subsets and the cardinality is bigger than the cardinality of G, then BC is equal to G. And this is not too difficult to see, and therefore I will skip the proof. Therefore, if you can somehow prove that the cardinality of A dot cardinality of A dot A, the cardinality of A dot A plus the cardinality of A is bigger than PQ, then by this Pigeonhole principle, A dot A would be the full group. Therefore, we need a lower bound for A dot A. And such a lower bound for A dot A was provided by Nasser's theorem. And this is one of the cornerstone of the things. And what does this Nasser's theorem say? For any subset B of G, we define the stabilizer of B to be those elements of G such that GB belongs to B for every B belongs to B. That is the definition of the stabilizer. Then the stabilizer is clearly a subgroup of G. And the Nasser's theorem says the following. Suppose B is a subset of J, where G is an abelian group, then you have actually a lower bound for B dot B. The lower bound for B dot B comes from, you take the B dot B, you take the stabilizer of the B dot B, call it H, and see how many cosets of H this B actually meets. How many cosets of H B has elements, and call that number as lambda. Then if the lambda is a number of cosets of H containing at least one element of B, then B dot B is bigger than or equal to 2 lambda minus 1 times the cardinality of H. Therefore, what you have to do is somehow know the cardinality of H, and then you can take the stabilizer, and probably most of the time you won't know any idea about the stabilizer. But then B dot B would be equal to 2 lambda minus 1 H, and which I can now use the original theorem. I take A dot A and A dot A plus A. If I can somehow make it that this is bigger than PQ, then A dot A will be Z Q Z star. This is the combinatorial aspect which we need. And the other aspect which we need is the Boole-Titmarsh inequality, which we will talk about later. Yeah. Now that is a proposition. Suppose Q is an integer and G is Z over Q Z star, and my FQ I take to be Q power C, and then I am now interested in what is the best C that I can get. And let's assume for the present C is bigger than 3, because the first result of Ramare and Wagar, as we saw, was 16 over 3, and A is defined as before, which means that A is those elements of G, those residue classes, such that there exists a prime P less than or equal to FQ with P congruent to A modulo. In that case, one can prove that either A dot A is equal to G, which is exactly what I want, or there may be some subgroup which gives an abstraction. And this subgroup which gives an abstraction is a subgroup whose index is rather small. The index of the subgroup is at most 2C by C minus 3, and A dot A is equal. Yeah. And remember, H is the stabilizer of A dot A. Since H is the stabilizer of A dot A will always be the union of the cosets of H, a union of full cosets of H. Now we use this theorem with the FQ is equal to Q power 16 over 3, which is the thing. And when you use 16 over 3, then the C is 16 over 3, and therefore the index of H is, okay, will give you 4, but then you can argue a little more carefully, the index of H will be at most 2. And therefore, and if the index of H is 2, then, and you see the cardinality of A would be, the cardinality of A is, in our argument, would be a little less than 0.5. Once the cardinality of A is a little less than 0.5, and if the index of the stabilizer is 2, then it is not possible really to prove that A dot A is equal to G. This is for the simple reason that you can take, once the cardinality of A is less than 0.5 times the cardinality of G, you can take the squares in G. The squares in G has a cardinality which is 0.5 times G. Since the squares in the, have a 0.5 G, you can always choose an A which is contained in the squares, whose cardinality is whatever you want, provided it is less than 0.5. But then A dot A will be contained in squares. A dot A also will be contained in squares. And therefore, there is no way you can get the full. Okay. And now what we want is to, how do we prove that this, the A has a big cardinality? Which means, how do we prove that enough number of residue classes will contain a prime? The easiest way is really count how many primes are there, and then see how many residue classes are, each residue class can contain how many primes. And if you know how many primes are there, and if you know how each residue class contains how many primes, then you know that the number of residue classes should be at least, suppose there are, okay, we'll go through this thing. So every prime, we will look at number of primes up to Q power C, and in the residue classes. The number of primes up to Q power C would be around Q power C divided by log Q power C. This is a prime number theorem. The prime number theorem says that the number of primes up to Q power C is around Q power C divided by log Q power C. And of course, we are removing those residue classes A such that A and Q are not co-prime, but then they do not contain too many primes at all. Each residue class can contain at most one prime, and therefore the Q you can forget, and therefore you still have your Q power C divided by log Q power C, because the C is 16 over 3 is what we are starting with, and therefore subtracting the Q will not matter. And now what we need is how many residue classes are there in, how many primes are there in each residue class. And that is provided by something called the Brune-Titmarsh theorem. The Brune-Titmarsh theorem says that if you take a residue class A in Z over Q is a star, then the number of primes up to any x P complement to A mod of Q will be 2 times that x divided by phi Q times the logarithm of x over Q. Let's try to understand this a little better. If, I mean, what you would expect? You would expect that there are number of primes up to Q power C is around Q power C divided by phi Q. Since the number of primes is Q power C, sorry, the number of primes up to Q power C is Q power C divided by logarithm of Q power C. Since the number of primes is Q power C divided by logarithm of Q power C, and you expect that the primes to be equally distributed in every residue class, therefore what you would expect is that the number of primes in each residue class is Q power C divided by phi Q times the logarithm of Q power C. But what you are getting is slightly weaker in two senses. In sense number one, that you get an extra constant 2, and denominator is not log x but log x over q. There are two main differences compared to what you would expect. But on the other hand, of course, there are results which are low if your q is much smaller than x, like q less than a power of log x and things like that, then you get exactly the expected asymptotic formula. But in this particular case, you lose your 2 and the log x is replaced by log x over q. But anyway, therefore, each residue class can contain at most 2 q power c divided by phi q log q power c by q primes. And totally there are q power c by log q power c primes. Consequently, the cardinality of A, which is those residue classes which contain a prime, multiplied by 2 q power c by phi q log q power c by q, is at least q power c log q power c. And that means cardinality of A is rather big, and once the cardinality of A is rather big, then A dot A, you can use Ness's theorem, and that will prove A dot A is Z over Q Z star. And this argument is what we want, and now we want to know how one can improve this argument. Yeah, but now remember one thing which I said, that if the index is 2, then you still get into the problem. But the index is 2, then you have to really prove that this A and if H is the subgroup of Z over Q is of star, and the index of H is exactly 2, then this A, which is the set of all primes up to Q power 16 over 3, intersects both the corsets of H. If it intersects both the corsets of H, then it's okay, because essentially because by Ness's theorem, lambda is equal to 2, and once you have lambda is equal to 2, then you are happy. Yeah, here Ness's theorem. Then if I say that this lambda is the number of corsets of H containing at least one element from B, and if you say that both the corsets will contain at least one element, then lambda is bigger than 2, which means B dot B is bigger than 3 times cardinality of H, but the cardinality of H is cardinality of G over 2, because it's the index 2, and therefore you are happy. Now how do you prove it? Which means that you have to somehow prove H, you remember, is a subgroup of G of index 2. And that essentially means that this can be viewed as a kernel of a quadratic character. And therefore, what we need is that if chi is any quadratic character of G, therefore chi is any quadratic character of Z over Q Z star, then there exists one prime P1 such that chi P1 equal to 1 and the one prime P2 such that chi P2 equal to minus 1. Sorry, that's a mistake. There's one prime with chi is equal to plus 1 and one prime with chi P equal to minus 1. And suppose that is not true. Suppose chi P equal to 1 for every prime. Then since chi is completely multiplicative and periodic mod Q, since chi is completely multiplicative, then chi n will be 1 for every integer n up to q power 16 over 3. But on the other hand, chi is also periodic modulo Q. That would mean that chi n equal to 1 for every n co-prime to Q. That means chi is a trivial character. But that's not true because I am assuming chi is a quadratic character. On the other hand, suppose chi p equal to minus 1 for every p, then I have to get a contradiction. Therefore, let f is equal to 1 convolution chi. This one convolution chi means that f of n is defined by summation b dividing n chi of p. That's what exactly one means by the convolution. Then for any n with the GCD 1, it follows that fn is not equal to 0 if and only if the total number of divisors of n is odd, because every chi p is minus 1, and in other words, n has to be a square for the part which is co-prime to p. That means fn equal to 0 if and only if n looks like a dm square with the GCD of m and q equal to 1, and this d, what one number theory is called d divides q power infinity, which essentially means that every prime which divides d implies that p divides q. That's what it will be, d divides q power infinity, which means that d is of course doesn't play a much of a role, which means for all practical purposes n is a square. If all, therefore fn is different from 0 only when n is practically a square. If f, that means essentially that when you take the summation over fn, since this survives only when n is practically a square, this number is O square root of x. On the other hand, when you look at the summation fn and go back to the definition, summation b dividing n chi b, this would give you that this is equal to ab lesser than x chi b. And by standard argument, this will be something like an x times L1 chi. And we know already some bounds for L1 chi. For example, one knows that L1 chi is bigger than 0.96 by square root of q. And therefore, this x times L1 chi is rather large, but on the other hand, square root of x is rather small, and then you get a condition. That would mean that if you take actually primes up to q power 16 over 3, in fact, even if you choose primes much smaller than that, then for every quadratic character modulo q, these primes will intersect both h as well as complement of h. Now we want to understand how to improve the result. And the first improvement is due to Ramare, Serra, and Srivastava, and they got with the FQ essentially Q per C, and this essentially means that you have to improve two things. Number one, the Brute-Titmarsh inequality and the prime over here. And this is exactly what you have to do. And remember, this Brute-Titmarsh inequality as such cannot be improved much, because even the constant 2 cannot be improved, because the existence of this constant 2 is somehow intimately connected with what are called the Siegel zeros. And once you don't have any information of 2, then it's not possible to improve this 2. Therefore, what we need is an improvement in a slightly different sense. Therefore, let me explain. Brute-Titmarsh inequality provides an upper bound for the number of primes x which are congruent to A modulo Q. What we are planning to do is essentially take a suitable weight function and count the primes with the weight function. And therefore, the weight function which we are taking is something called, let's say, eta. And therefore, we will get the pi eta of XAFQ is the number of primes congruent to A modulo Q with the eta of P over X. In fact, for any subgroup H of Z over Q Z star and U in Z over Q Z star, let pi it of x UHQ will be those primes which belong to the residue class UH. UH is now a union of residue classes and eta of P over. Okay, therefore H is of course a subgroup of G, and therefore the cosets, and therefore UH is also a coset of G, which means that it is just a union of residue classes. And what we want to know is that even though we may not be able to get a good upper bound for the individual P congruent to A modulo Q for every single residue class, but if you take a coset, then for a coset, whether you can get a little better than what we can get for a group Titmarsh. Therefore, this is not something about individual residue classes, it is for the whole cosets. And the eta, which I am now going to choose, is 2t, which is when 0 is less than or equal to t less than or equal to half, 2 into 1 minus t and a half less than or equal to t less than 1. I mean, this is something which is a goes up and down type thing. I mean, this is one of the standard weights which it takes, and 0 else. And then what we will prove is, okay, there are two results. One is the standard, the one below is the standard prime number theorem, which means that if you are now taking primes of the x, but counting it with this weight, 2t, 2 into 1 minus t is 0, then the number of primes is exactly x over 2 by log x. Therefore, you have essentially x over 2 by log x primes. I mean, because now I have counted primes with this weight. But on the other hand, if I now take it a single residue class, okay, single residue class I don't have answer, but if you take the cosets, u times h, then it is 1.249x divided by y by log x. Therefore, every coset has 1.249x by y by log x primes, and consequently, the number of cosets containing at least one element is y over 2.49. And this number 2.498 is rather important for us, because as I was telling earlier, that if the residue, if the index of the subgroup, which is a stabilizer, is small, then only we get into trouble. If the stabilizer has a big index, we don't have a trouble. And what I really want to, when I do all these questions, what I need, the problem is that the subgroup of index 2 will give me trouble first of all, and that we know how to handle it. We know when the index 2 subgroup gives trouble, then you say that actually the index 2 subgroup as well as its complement, the primes meet both of them, and therefore that is no problem. The next trouble will come actually from the index 5 subgroup. If there's an index 5 subgroups, and if the primes go and sit only 2 cosets, then there is no way you can prove that A dot A equal to G. You have to somehow prove that the primes go and sit at least in 3 cosets. That's not too difficult to see. For example, going back to probably the additive level, you take the group set over 5 sets. Okay, this is a group of index 5, group of order 5, and takes 2 residue classes 0 and 1, and then that is A. Then if you look at A plus A plus A, it will not compare, it will not cover the full group. A plus A will cover only 0, 1, 2, 3, and it will not cover 4. But on the other hand, if you have this, you have elements in 3 cosets, 0, 1, and 2, then you have no problem. Then A plus A will cover all these. And therefore, somehow we have the subgroup of index 5 gives me trouble, and that is what I have to do, and that is exactly this 2.498 it does. Therefore, when y is equal to 5, the index is 5, then the ceiling of 5 over 2.498 is exactly 3. And if it were not 2.498, if it were 2.501, then the ceiling would have been 2. And with the ceiling 2, there will have a problem, but this 2.498 is here. Now, if we now go back to the brute Titmarsh, as I was telling earlier, that improving the constant 2 for every A and Q is really not possible, because this improvement of a constant 2 would say something about the Ziegel zero or the exceptional zero as they are called, and that is considered a very difficult problem. However, there is a result of Cooley which improves of the result for most of the AQ. For our applications, it is sufficient that for any fixed Q, if there is an improvement in the average over A, we obtain such a result using the ideas of Cooley and Motohashi. And this is the result of Cooley, that phi of xqa is less than or equal to 1 plus delta 1 times x divided by pq log x over q. In this particular range, x power 2/3 and x power 1 minus delta 2. And it is 2 plus delta 1 into x divided by pq into log x over square root of q, 1 less than or equal to q less than or equal to x over 2 by 3. You see, that is the type of improvement which one always also interested. That instead of the log x over q, which appears in the root-Titmus theorem, whether you can do something like a log x over square root of q. And that would be a good improvement, and most of the cases, times, that improvement already serves the purpose. And therefore, we prove the following result, that f, okay, be the indicator function of the interval -1 plus 1, and g is a triple convolution of f. And then use eta t is g of 60 minus 3 divided by 6. And the original idea of the paper of Ramare, Serra, and Srivastav was essentially they were taking a double convolution, f star f, but we are now taking a triple convolution. Then, when x is somewhat large, 900 cube by 5 by 2, and these are the places where we need x to be large, then we can actually count the number of primes in A modulo q, eta px, which is 2 times 1.004 plus epsilon a times 2x by 9 divided by pq into logarithm of x over 10 power 10 times square root of q. This is the comment which I was making, that instead of log x over q, we get something like a log x over 10 power 10 times square root of q. But on the other hand, we lose a little. We lose essentially some epsilon a. But this epsilon a loss is not very serious, because one can actually have a good L2 estimate for this epsilon. Okay. And in order to prove this, of course, we need some estimates on the Selbach's weight. And the Selbach's weight, let's recall that originally is g of z equal to L less than or equal to z mu square L divided by phi L. And then your lambda d, the weights are d times ud by gz into summation L congruent to 0 modulo d L less than or equal to z mu square L by phi L d less than or equal to z and 0 L. I mean, this is the standard one in the Selbach C. And this is essentially used to detect the primes. Okay. For example, when you look at this, I mean, the point is that essentially you want to detect the primes, and when you want to go beyond the Brunn's method, then the Selbach's method of using this weights lambda d to detect the primes turns out to be very powerful. And with those Selbach's weight, we need about for summation over n, summation d1 d2 equal to n, lambda d1 lambda d2 whole square. And really, this is something which we really do not know how to do, and consequently, we choose a slightly different weights. And the weights where probably it is the things are little flexible and we can handle. And the weights which we choose are lambda d is very simply ud log z by d by log z when d less than or equal to z and 0 else. And 1 over gz we happen we define to be summation over d1 d2 lambda d1 lambda d2 by d1 d2. And this, which is the original weight of Selbach, this 1 over gz is exactly what lambda d1 lambda d2 by d1 d2, but we take a slightly modified one, which makes it easier for us to do the calculations. Of course, it has also its negative part. The negative part is with the Selbach's weight, you get 1 over gz is less than 1 over log z, whereas with our weight 1 over gz is less than 1.00303 by log z. Which means in the main term, we lose a factor 1.003. And in most of the applications, losing anything at all in the main term is, of course, bad. You can't, therefore, even you can afford to lose something in the error term, but you cannot afford to lose in the main term. But on the other hand, if you are doing theoretical work, that is very important. But on the other hand, if you're doing the numerical work, then losing something in the main term so that the theory can be done can be easily handled. And then we say that this summation which we are looking at is less than 4.5 into 10 power 5 z square by log 2. This implies the upper bound which we mentioned earlier. Using that, we deduce the coordinate FA is bigger than 0.375 times P2. And this is the point which I was talking about. This is 0.375 times PQ, and this number is less than half, which essentially means that there is every possibility of this particular A being the subset of squares. Okay, because the squares are essentially PQ over 2 elements. And if this A has only meets only one residue class of H, and it does not meet H complement, it means that it is contained completely in the squares, then there is no way you can prove that A dot A dot A. And also note that cardinality of A is less than 0.4, which means that there is every possibility that there is the subgroup in the stabilizer is of index 5, and this A meets only 2 cosets of H. And if it meets 2 cosets of H, then there is a great no way you can prove that A dot A would be equal to G. And remember, this 0.37 is reasonably a big number, which means that only the index 2 subgroup and the index 5 subgroup give you trouble, and no other subgroup gives you trouble. And for the index 5, then we just go back to the original idea of Ramare sir and Srivastava, which says that if you take an index 5 and if you don't look at one single residue class, but if you take the union, if you take the full cosets, UH, then you get a good upper bound, and that is good enough for us. And thank you. Any questions, comments?
Prada?
Somebody has raised a hand, but Sanjeevani Garge. But yeah, can you probably ask me what you want? I'm not able to hear anything.
You please unmute and you can ask.
Oh, I'm muted, is it?
No, I'm asking Sanjeevani.
Oh, Sanjeevani can. Yeah.
Sanjeevani, you please ask directly to the speaker.
Or you can put it in the, is there some place in the Zoom where you can put your question?
Yeah, you can also ask in the chat box.
Where?
Near the share screen, there is a provision for chat.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, chat, I don't see much. Yeah, nobody has asked a question. Okay then, thank you.
Is Rita Prada around here? Two participants are raising their hands.
Yeah, but I'm not able to hear anything.
Please unmute and ask directly. Participants, please ask directly to the speaker. Please wait for a minute, sir.
Yeah, sure, no problem. And this technology is slightly difficult for everybody to understand, and even I cannot claim that I have understood it well.
Unmute it. I think the participants are muted, so we will unmute it them.
Okay. Oh, participants are okay. From your side, you have muted participants.
Okay. Now, participants, will you please directly ask to the speaker?
Now I can unmute myself. Oh, thank you, Balu, for the wonderful talk. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I couldn't unmute myself or write anything on the chat.
Okay, I see. So you unmuted.
I wrote something on my.
Yeah, the host was not allowing others to unmute.
Okay, there was a problem.
Yeah, can I
Also,
ask
chat
now?
was disabled, I think.
Yeah, this was disabled.
Yeah. So, any questions?
Yeah, can I ask?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, there was a eta t defined.
Yeah,
Slide contain A is at least y by 2.498.
yeah.
So can you go to that eta t slide, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah. This one or the area?
You have to share the screen.
Yeah. Oh, I have not shared the screen.
You have to share.
Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, let me do that. Adding the screen. Here it is. But now the.
Kindly share the screen now.
How do you share the screen now? That?
Present now. As you are presenting the slide presentation,
Yeah. Okay. I can.
you please present now.
Sharing the screen and then suddenly I remove it and okay, I will do it in a couple of minutes, but you can ask the question 1 minute.
The host disabled attending screen sharing, so you have to allow first sharing the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 minute. Yeah, I'll do it in a minute. Okay. Just give me 2 minutes. I'll share the screen.
One question.
Huh.
The Srivastava is Priyamvad Srivastava or which
Yes.
Srivastava is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, previous Srivastava. இந்த ஷேர் பண்ணிட்டு இருந்தேன் அப்புறம் எங்கேயோ போயிடுச்சு ஷேர் பண்ணணும்
Yeah.
Yes.
This,
okay, fine, thanks. Yeah, so yes, tell me.
so at t is equal to half, is it 2t or 2 times 1 minus t? Which one?
Both the same, no? At t equal to half, 2t is also equal to 1.
That's why it didn't matter.
2 into 1 minus t also is 1. And therefore that doesn't really
It
matter.
doesn't matter much.
So, any other question?
Sir, I had a little more general question. Can these slides be shared with us?
Sure, definitely. I can I can probably pass on to the organizers, and the organizers will be able to share with whoever wants.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So any other question?
Very good morning, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
I am
please.
Kukya Prasanna from Bangalore City University.
Uh.
I wanted to know the generalization of, I wanted to know the brief idea of Euler's generalization of Fermat's theorem to cryptography. Can you please give some
This is
idea?
completely unrelated, but sorry. But can you ask me again? What is it wrong?
Euler's generalization of Fermat's theorem as an application to cryptography.
That's an application to cryptography.
Yes.
Okay, I don't see how I can orally explain this to you. Is it the Fermat's little theorem says essentially that a power p minus 1 is congruent to 1 modulo p if a and p are co-prime. The Euler's theorem will tell that a power p minus 1 into q minus 1 will be congruent to 1 modulo pq when a is co-prime to pq. Correct?
Yes, yes.
And this essentially can be used for RSA, for example, for sending messages. The whole advantage essentially there is that you have the, okay, when you are coding, then whatever you are doing for coding, and if you actually reverse operations, then of course I have to give you decode. The only question which you want to know is that even if I know the coding procedures, the reversing the operation, can it be made very difficult? And this the Euler's theorem essentially allows you to do that. That you can have a key for coding, and the reversing the key is not so easy. If you don't, I mean, if you already unless you know already the reverse.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, any other question? So maybe I'll ask one question, Balu. So
Yes.
So for it's just looking at prime in arithmetic progression, then what is the bound q to the power what?
5.18.
5.18. And if you look at product of two primes, it's
Product of two primes, I really do not know anything. I mean, except whatever you can do by analytic methods, I do not see how you can bring any combinatorial method at all. Whereas when you come to 3 primes, then it's possible to bring combinatories.
okay. So for 5 primes, you can do better than.
Yeah, obviously, then you can do much better because the combinatorics will play a very good role.
So, like, if I want to reverse the question, say if I give you the exponent, so like I want something smaller than q to the power 11 by 10, say. Okay, and I ask you how many primes you.
I think it can be worked out, but I really can't say immediately. But that's a very interesting question. Yeah, I mean, given an exponent, how many you need? Yeah, that we can probably look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But no one has looked at it.
I don't think so. Yeah, for 1 prime, this sequence zeros gives you a lot of problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But in that case, you can think of it just as a sieve question, right? And you have a sieve with some level of distribution, and then sieve theory will tell you how far you can sieve.
Huh. Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You get something from there, right? Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay. So, any other question? No? So if not, let's thank the speaker again. Thank you, Balu.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Ritaprada and Balu. The next session will start at 11:15, parallel session. The speakers are Martin Milanik and Kalyan Chakrabarti. Next session starts at 11:15. Okay, thank you. Surya.